I don't see anybody.
Having some. All they've got is in progress.
All right, have everyone take their seats. Get started. Going to call to order the meeting of the Planning Commission for the City of Oregon City, June 10th, 2024. Staff, please call the roll.
Commissioner LaSalle?
Here.
Commissioner Dole?
Here.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer?
Here.
Commissioner Laws? Here. Commissioner West is excused. Vice Chair Espy?
Here.
Chair Stoll?
Here. Next, we'll move on to the meeting minutes. Any discussions or motions on those? Need a motion from.
Move to approve minutes. Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? No? All right. Call the vote, please.
Commissioner LaSalle?
Aye.
Commissioner Dole?
Aye.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer?
Aye.
Commissioner Laws?
Aye.
Vice Chair Espy?
Aye.
Chair Stoll?
Aye. I'll move on to public comment. This is for items not on the agenda. We have one. Correct? That's okay. So Michael Duran, I believe.
Oh, this is on the agenda. Okay.
I might have been a bit confused. I'm going to be speaking generally about items that are on the agenda, but...
Go ahead and turn your microphone on so the light's on, and then...
Yeah, it was on, sorry.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah, but I wasn't speaking into it, sorry.
Yeah.
I was a bit confused, so I'm interested in items that are on the agenda, but wanted to just take time at the beginning to make comments. Is that acceptable, or should I sit down?
So this period of time is for comments that are, comments for items that are not on the agenda.
Will there be time to comment on items on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Which item?
I'm interested in both.
Okay. All right. Great.
Yeah.
Any other public comments? Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item number 2, presentation from representatives from the Housing Authority of Clackamas County and Northwest Housing Alternatives.
Hi, good evening. I'm going to just kind of start it out and introduce the topic. So this is a topic that came up when you were putting your work plan together, and it was one of the items that you requested some more information / education on. And so it was a broad topic that you identified in terms of housing affordability and affordable housing, and I think you also talked about programs to help first-time home buyers. And so tonight's topic, our speakers are going to speak more directly to affordable housing. And I wanted to just kind of set the table a little bit about what, at least what I think about. And so maybe we can kind of be on the same page when we talk about affordable housing. In my mind, when I hear affordable housing, I think of it with like a capital A, and it's subsidized somehow. The cost of buying the home or the rent is somehow subsidized. And so that's kind of the piece that the Northwest Housing Alternatives and the county are going to talk about tonight. I think the other piece, though, to keep in mind that I believe I've heard you all ask questions about and discuss is this idea of housing affordability, which to me is, housing that's affordable at different income levels. And there is a definition that's used by HUD of what that means, and it's typically 30% of your overall income, no more than that, should go to housing. And so that's clearly going to be different for different income levels. And in our housing needs analysis that was adopted in December of 21, we had some information in there that I included in your packet about housing affordability in Oregon City. And so at that time, the median house price was, I think, around, I'd have to pull it up again, but it was somewhere around, I'm going to say $550,000. And we had a pretty I guess, in my opinion, a low percentage of households that could afford that, and I think it was around 18%. And the median rent was somewhere between 12 and 1,500, and we had a higher percentage of households in Oregon City who could afford that rent. So I guess I just wanted you to kind of keep that in mind of what our demographics are, what our housing costs are, what they are in Oregon City, and that kind of distinction between housing affordability at all income levels versus affordable housing that's somehow subsidized. So with that kind of introduction and setting the table, I'm really pleased that Devin and Trell, Devin's with the Housing Authority of Clackamas County, and Trell is with Northwest Housing Alternatives, and they're going to kind of talk about their organizations and talk a little bit about affordable housing. And I will turn it over to you, and I have the one slide. I can bring that up whenever you're ready, or... Okay, sounds great.
Good evening. I'm Devin Ellen. I'm the Housing Development Director with the Housing Authority of Clackamas County. And what the Housing Authority does is we run several programs. We run our public housing program, which provides housing for folks that we own the units. We have 2 big public housing properties in Oregon City. And the funding for that comes directly from HUD. So every year we get a capital grant and an operating grant. We also oversee the administration of Section 8, so that's rental assistance, and that takes 2 forms. So there's housing choice vouchers that are tenant-based, and so they stay with the tenant and they can move to an apartment of their choosing. And then we also have project-based rental assistance. So the new project Las Flores in Oregon City has 70 units that are project-based, and that subsidy is attached to the unit itself. We also administer the Metro Affordable Housing Bond and the rental assistance through the Metro Supportive Housing Services measure. So that's a little bit about what we do. We also do some development in-house, and we work with a lot of partners like Trell, and talk with a lot of jurisdictions throughout the county about ways that they can grow their affordable housing in their communities. So I'm going to pass it to Trell, and I'll be available to answer questions.
Thanks, Devin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I've lost track of time. My name is Trell Anderson. I'm the Executive Director at Northwest Housing Alternatives. We are a nonprofit community development corporation, born and raised in Milwaukee, right behind Milwaukee High School. You might have heard of the Annie Ross Homeless Services shelter. It's a family shelter. It's been for many, many years the only full-time, year-round family shelter operating in Clackamas County for almost 30 years. That shelter system is expanding thanks to the Metro funds that have come to Clackamas County, but the Annie Ross House was the first and really established Northwest Housing Alternatives in the mid-'80s as a local community-based nonprofit housing services organization. We've grown to today be a significant affordable housing development organization as well. We maintain that Annie Ross House Homeless Family Services program focused in Clackamas County, but we now work statewide to develop, operate, and take under stewardship and long-term ownership over 2,500 units of affordable housing around the state. Our portfolio is somewhat concentrated in the Portland metro area, but we've recently had open houses in Ontario and Warrenton. I'm going down to celebrate an open house in Florence on Thursday. But we're scattered around the state and hope to continue the work in all communities. We have a lot of experience working with local jurisdictions, with faith-based organizations, and with housing authorities, as Devin has said. We provide resident services across all of our properties, so these are staff that Northwest Housing Alternatives hires to kind of be on site on specific hours and integrate community services onto the properties, make sure that our residents are aware of and have access to all of the supportive services in the community. Our number one goal in providing resident services is housing retention. We want to support everyone in retaining their housing long-term so that, it doesn't disrupt a household at any time. We're providing housing to seniors, to families, and to veterans in various properties across the state. The Clayton Moore, you might remember, was a recent grand opening focused on veterans housing that was in partnership with the Clackamas Housing Authority, was one that we developed and then did a turnkey so that the Clackamas Housing Authority owns it long-term. That's what we do in a nutshell. I'll add, asset management is a great big component of what we do. We want to make sure that our properties are look as good, ongoing, and function as well as any other property in any community, that you can't drive by our property and identify it as affordable housing. When we develop, we really start that process with design and make sure that everything is integrated into the community. And then over time, that our communities remain fresh and have great curb appeal, and that we're very responsive to our neighbors if there's anything that's going on. That's us. I've been there 6 years now as executive director. Prior to Northwest Housing Alternatives, I was the director of community development at Catholic Charities of Oregon, and that's where I got some of my statewide experience. And actually, prior to that, I was the executive director at the Housing Authority here in Clackamas County for 6 years. And so I'm a little bit familiar with Oregon City and Clackamas County as well. Would you like us to get into some of the content and discussion?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So, wanted to share kind of what I think in terms of the difference between housing affordability and affordable housing. When I think of housing affordability, I think of a household or an individual and what it costs that household. So is housing affordable as described, kind of the definition is no more than 30% income towards housing costs, including utilities. And, that's managed very strictly, for example, in federal programs, in state programs that we use. Devin mentioned the Section 8 program, for example. That is a rent assistance voucher that goes with residents wherever they may choose to live. And that's a great example of a federal subsidy that supports a family with their housing affordability. Affordable housing, I think of it simply as the bricks and sticks, right? So it has a front door, it's got a roof. And so when we talk about affordable housing, you can immediately switch that vision to think of, opening that front door and think of the bricks and sticks when we talk about affordable housing. And so that example is Devin described the public housing units that the Housing Authority has. That would be affordable housing. It's the portfolio I mentioned that we have of 2,500 units around the state. We can count the doors. I gave you the specific number. That's affordable housing. So that's one way I work to, in these definitions and in these conversations, distinguish between housing affordability, household, and affordable housing, bricks and sticks, front doors. What else? Right. So more definitions of affordable housing, or examples. When we talk about affordable housing, the bricks and sticks, it's usually rent restricted and there's a regulatory agreement attached to it. When we build affordable housing, here's a good opportunity for the slide.
Okay.
When we develop affordable housing, we're accessing numerous funding sources to kind of interrupt the capital stack, if you will, of the actual bricks and sticks. So the slide that is being presented is, first of all, it's very dated. You can't build 100 units for, I think, what did I say, $20 million anymore. So it's dated like that. But it's meant to just give conceptually at the highest level, an example between when a private developer goes in and develops housing, they typically have to borrow a great deal, bring their own equity to it, and then go to the bank and negotiate, rents, if you will. So the builder has to go to the bank and say, look, we think we can achieve this level of rents, or if it's home ownership, we think we can achieve this level of sale, and convince the bank that, the bank should lend them the necessary amount of money to it, that loan will be paid off by that rent level or by those home sales. Our model on the far right is really different. Our model is we're trying to borrow as little amount as debt as we can. And so we're bringing a whole host of different resources into the capital stack of an affordable housing deal, a property. Oftentimes we use the low-income housing tax credit program. That's a federal IRS program, but it's administered at the state level, in this case through Oregon Housing and Community Services. It's a highly competitive resource. So anytime that we're doing affordable housing that includes the low-income housing tax credit in our capital stack, we might be 3, 4, sometimes 5 years out because it's super competitive, and we know that there are competing projects, sometimes our own, in the timing of when we can secure those tax credits. And then we shop to all kinds of different programs. Many of those in that layered cake approach on the right with the different shading and coloring are administered also by Oregon Housing and Community Services, and they have a consolidated entry to access those programs, and we kind of have to check the boxes as to which ones we want, depending is it appropriate for the population or the community that we're in. But all of that is to press down, again, in the end, how much are we borrowing? Because to pay off that loan, that's just from cash flow off of the property. That's from rents. And so the lower we can suppress the debt on a property, the lower we can keep the rents. Does that make sense? Yeah, great. So some of those resources, I said most of those resources are accessible through Oregon Housing and Community Services. And now's the time to kind of introduce what role can a local jurisdiction play in that capital stack. And different local jurisdictions do it different ways. One of the lessons I learned in working here in Clackamas County is not to mention the city of Portland very often, but I'm gonna have to just because, it's an example as a compare and contrast. The city has large amounts of money to add to the capital stack. And they have that either through their general fund or their housing bonds that they will do, or through the Metro bond in this case, which is managed by the Housing Authority. Not very many cities in Oregon have their own capital to put into deals and stimulate affordable housing. Eugene has just a little bit. Other communities, Eugene, like Eugene, use their community development block grant program, which I think is organized at the county level, Health, Housing, and Human Services. But there's all kinds of little mechanisms like that we pursue. For Oregon City, or let me say for Milwaukee, might be another parallel to Oregon City. Milwaukee has put together a pretty detailed affordable housing action plan that would be available for you to look at. What are the different things at the local jurisdiction that the city of Milwaukee has entertained to stimulate affordable housing? One of the things, a couple of the things that they include in their affordable housing strategy, one is a construction excise tax, where they're collecting fees off of other developments and putting it into an affordable housing trust fund that then they can use to stimulate or add to other local affordable housing projects. When a local jurisdiction does that, they have the opportunity to engage in the negotiations with the developer about what rent levels and how to restrict those units, how long to restrict the term of affordability, for example. And so it puts you in a place of saying, can we get 10 years affordability out of this? Can we get 20 years affordability out of this? And at what rent levels can we get because of this subsidy? Oftentimes, the local jurisdiction is part of the layers there, and usually a tax credit investor or a bank and Oregon Housing and Community Services will drive those discussions about terms. So we often sign up for 60 years of affordability term. So if we're in the city of Portland, it's 99 years, for example. And then the rent levels will vary, typically starting at 60% and below area median income. And I believe some charts were provided about income levels and AMIs in your packet. So we usually start at the highest rents are at about 60% median family income, and then work down from there, the more subsidy that we can pull into a property or a development down to 50% rents or 30% rents. And then we love to bring in the project-based rental assistance that Devin offered, for example, mentioned, because if we have, that's applied to the families. And if we have rents at 60%, but then we do an overlay with a voucher, then people can come into those 60% units, very low income people, and only pay 30% of their income. So while the property collects a 60% level rent, that may not be affordable to the individual, but with the voucher, it becomes an affordable rent for typically a very, very low income household. Why don't I pause there and see if there's questions for either one of us?
Yeah, any questions? Commissioner LaSalle?
You are dismantling and rebuilding the low-income project on Holcomb Boulevard. What happens to the people that are currently residing in the units that are being demolished?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're repositioning that property, and we're using a program called Section 18. It's a HUD program that they've put together because they know that housing authorities across the country are struggling to maintain and operate their public housing, because over time that funding from HUD has been dwindling. And so they've been putting together programs to what they call reposition. So taking the property out of Section 9, also known as public housing, and converting it to Section 8. So through the Section 18 process, the Housing Authority applies for rental assistance, so tenant protection vouchers. And as part of the Section 18 approval, we need to provide replacement housing for all the folks that are being displaced due to the redevelopment. So they will get a tenant protection voucher and work with our relocation consultant to find new replacement housing. All of their moving costs and deposits are covered by the Housing Authority. And then they get first right to return to a new unit at the development once it's complete. Another thing we've done is that for all of the Metro Bond projects that we have sponsored with Metro Bond funds, like Las Flores, for example, we get priority preference in their leasing plans, so that folks displaced from, say, Clackamas Heights will get priority on the waiting list for one of those units.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? No? All right, well, that was easy. You guys explained it well.
Thank you. Before I go, let me just offer a couple of resources. There are toolkits available for local jurisdictions with the National League of Cities to help stimulate housing production. The Oregon League of Cities is up to par with current land use regulations, and I think also are developing and may even have a toolkit for local jurisdictions. There's a national nonprofit called Strong Towns that also has a toolkit. And then, of course, the city of Milwaukee, as I mentioned, has a very detailed affordable housing action plan. The city of Wilsonville has a housing production plan. And then just recently, the city of Lake Oswego, while they don't have a full-blown plan, they adopted a really important measure to support affordable housing ongoing with the abatement of the property taxes within the city. It helps us with the ongoing support of residents and operations of affordable housing as well. So thank you for your time, and I think we're both willing to come back anytime or in small groups or work sessions or whatever, just to continue the conversation.
All right, well, thank you. And that prompted a question from Commissioner Laws.
Real quick question. I was hearing we have some families in Clackamas County that we're talking about, and I don't know if you've heard anything about it, about low-income housing possibly as an option for low-income families to purchase. Is there such a thing at the moment going on possibly that is on the way? They're talking about it being possibly in Gresham right now, or is there any type of possibility of that in Clackamas County? Have you heard of such a thing?
Yes.
Okay.
So in addition to the two public housing properties, the big complexes, Oregon City View Manor and Clackamas Heights, the Housing Authority also has a 145 unit scattered site portfolio. And what we're hoping to do, it's no longer financially feasible for the Housing Authority to operate these units. So we're going through the same process with the Section 18. But what we'd love to do is to preserve as many of those units as possible, either through affordable homeownership or through a partnership with the Supportive Housing Services funding to provide, group homes or targeted recovery-oriented systems of care in those units. So right now we're working with local land trusts to come up with a strategy to preserve as many of those units as possible.
Additional question I have is, there is a concept of small towns, right? Small towns is what you're saying, is that concept? How's that being promoted through Clackamas County in terms of implementation, in terms of responsible development?
The resource I was referring to is called Strong Towns. Yes.
Strong Towns, excuse me.
Strong Towns, yes, sorry. And mostly they're an advocacy and education group. And so they'll have different mechanisms and tools and recommendations around housing, but also around traffic. So I would think there's a number of ways that Oregon City is already doing some of the things that Strong Towns suggests. But I could imagine an exercise in just the affordable housing component where we could sit down together, take what Strong Towns recommends and compare it to, what's currently happening across Clackamas County and in Oregon City, and then, considering the gaps.
What was interesting about Strong Towns is it was mentioning something about inviting people to the front of the homes in terms of development, like front porches, in terms of invitation of communities actually communicating when it comes to, obviously foot traffic. I guess we're seeing some of that in terms of recommendations for development. I don't know how far we're going with that at this point, but it'll be interesting to see if we promote that more in the future. So thank you.
All right, and I actually came up with a question, and actually Commissioner Espy might be able to answer it as well. When you were talking about the Lake Oswego property tax credit or abatement, does that apply only to the property taxes for the city of Lake Oswego, or is that for all the property taxes, county, special districts, and so forth?
Yeah, so the city council has jurisdiction only under their piece of it. We then work across the other taxing jurisdictions also to follow. When we get 51% of the total taxing jurisdictions to agree, then it's a complete tax abatement.
51%
of the
individual jurisdictions or of the dollar tax base?
The dollar tax base.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like the county and the city and a couple special districts would probably be enough?
School district.
School, yeah. Okay, got it. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? All right, thank you.
Thank you both for your time. We appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, we'll move on to item 3. It's stated as a public hearing, but Aquila can discuss that.
Correct. Yes, it is. The Park Place discussion is just that, a discussion. It's not yet a public hearing. I apologize for the agenda mix-up there. So it appears we had 2 issues with the agenda. One, we pointed people to Center Street, and 2, we have this listed as a public hearing. So we're going to just treat it as a discussion item. And I think it will be up to you and the commission if you want to allow public comment, but I believe you've received 2 requests to provide public comment.
Yeah, and actually along that line, I made a mistake and didn't ask Mr. Duran if he wanted to comment on the presentation we just heard. You do? Okay, yeah, come on up. Yeah, 3 minutes. Just state your name and city of residence.
Michael Doran from Oregon City, and I live in the Park Place area, more specifically in the Oak Tree Holcomb Elementary School area. And I recently attended a Park Place Neighborhood Association meeting where I learned a lot about what's happening. In fact, I learned it from a Facebook post where it said changes coming to the neighborhood was the headline of the Facebook post that was alerting residents of the meeting and the agenda. And the Housing Authority of Clackamas County, one of our presenters tonight, did a really detailed job with her associate explaining what was happening. And so my question at the meeting was, what I don't want to do is assume that, I guess I'll assume that you don't know anything because I don't know what you know, so I'll just share my opinion in that way. I'm sure you might be very well aware of what is happening. So the Oregon City View Manor property near Holcomb Elementary School eventually will be sold. And I'm very interested in what's going to happen with what I understand that to be a 20 acre parcel. And a question was asked of the representatives at the Homeowners Association meeting about traffic. That's an ongoing problem, and it speaks to everything on the agenda tonight. And so first, I would just ask for planning commissioners that maybe aren't aware of the area, have never perhaps visited the area, I would just ask you to give consideration to visit what's happening. There's lots happening, lots of construction. So one of the questions to the representatives at the Homeowners Association meeting was, well, what about traffic? And so the response was, well, there's going to be the Holly Lane extension, and there's going to be the Swan Road extension, and we all know those aren't happening anytime soon. And it speaks to, I've spoken before the Planning Commission before. I saw no one here tonight. I was expecting a full house. The last time I was here, there was a full house, so I thought, ooh, I better say something. And a phrase was used like a year and a half ago, square peg in a round hole. And so what I feel like is happening is we're doing more and more development, but we're not really doing anything for the roads and the infrastructure. And the Housing Authority also said, you know, well, basically we're taking Oregon City View Manor and combining with Clackamas Heights. And so it's not going to be additional, which that made sense. That seemed logical. So then what's going to happen up at Oregon City View Manor? 20 acres development. If it's going to be multi-use high-density housing, that's going to be additional traffic, additional pressure. We already have homes being built at the Ceres Farm property. We all know about what the Park Place development would like to have happen. So again, traffic, infrastructure, it has to be considered. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, now we can for real move on to the Park Place concept. Plan code refinement.
Yes, thank you. So this is kind of I'll just introduce this while we're getting set up here, but this is a continuation from last meeting, which, wow, was already a month ago in early May. And the kind of basic idea is that we are attempting to make changes to the municipal code. This effort will not change the concept plan. This effort will only change how that concept plan is implemented. And so we've identified several sections of code that need to be changed to implement the concept plan. And I just also want to make note that when the concept plan was adopted in 2008, there was a number of code changes that were made then. So this is revisions to kind of get it more dialed in. And with that, I'll just turn it back over to Pete and let him walk you through everything.
Hi, good evening. The first few slides of my presentation are a revision of, revisiting what we discussed at the May 13th, 2024 meeting. So once we get and then we are going to, second. There we go. So I'm going to provide that brief revisit on the background there. Then we're going to have a discussion from Carrie Richter, our city attorney, about the legal issues memorandum that's in your packet. And then I'm going to go into the code amendments that are in your packet. So first, a little background. At the May meeting, we gave you an overview of the revisions process, and we talked a little bit about the concept plan, which was adopted in 2008. And we did make some code amendments back then. We also, in 2021, as you know, we had an application for a master plan for 92 acres known as Park Place Crossing. That application was ultimately denied by the City Commission, and the applicant appealed the denial to the Land Use Board of Appeals, who then remanded that decision back to the city. The applicant has since withdrawn this application entirely. However, that review brought to light areas of our code that we can improve in order to have clear and objective review criteria in the code for housing. The application was what is called a quasi-judicial review for 92 acres of the whole concept plan area, which is 480 gross acres. And right now, we have not started our legislative process. We're just working through these initial ideas for code amendments. So while that land use application may feel pretty recent and fresh in your minds, it is important to take a big picture view of this process and a long range plan for that area, not just the 92 acres, but the areas south of Redland Road as well. Work to date, we have done, what we did was we adopted comprehensive plan designations on our comprehensive plan map, so that when lands within the concept plan area are annexed to the city, they receive a zoning designation. In 2008, we also adopted some site plan and design review standards and a new neighborhood commercial zone. We adopted a new R5 medium density residential zone for the majority of the area for a greater diversity of housing. And we also amended our geologic hazard and water resource overlay code and made it the natural resource overlay district. So there were a number of revisions made, but since the Park Place Crossing review called out the need for additional work. The elements that came out of the concept plan are the 11 that we've talked about. And some of these were implemented through design standards. Others were envisioned to be implemented by future zone changes. And we also adopted new updates to the infrastructure master plans, like the sewer, water, stormwater, and transportation system plans. The TSP was adopted in 2013 and is due for an update, I think, in the next couple of years. And the 2020 stormwater and grading design standards incorporated some of these elements. And I understand there's going to be some discussion about these as well tonight. The process we are going to visit is, for now, we're working through just work sessions on the code through spring and summer. We're going to do a check-in with the City Commission in summer 2024. We'll be presenting to the Neighborhood Association, Park Place, and the Citizen Involvement Committee also during that time. And then we'll start a legislative public hearing process with you and the City Commission. And now I'm going to hand it over to Carrie for a discussion of the legal issues memorandum in your packet.
My goal is to try to provide the legal parameters in which you need to make a decision from a high level. And so we can keep those in mind as we move forward with a proposed amendments. The law has changed significantly since the concept plan was adopted. And so we have to keep that in mind as we look at how we can implement the plan in a way that complies with state law. And there are a number of limitations. I want to talk through them just briefly. And then I want to invite questions and a discussion about them if you have any before we move on to the substance of what we've proposed. So the first limitation I think that it's worth talking about, and I know I've mentioned it to you before, is that the city cannot exact an obligation, require a developer to pay for improvements on land or to dedicate land without those obligations being roughly proportional to the impacts from the development. So if you have a one-lot house, you can't ask them to build a freeway, right? Because the house doesn't demand a freeway. The house demands perhaps a local street. And so we would exact a local street and then we would reimburse the development in the form of SDC credits or in the form of some other means for the overage. It works pretty easy with things like pipes. That's pretty easy to determine how much a house needs and how much is the overage. It gets a little harder when we're talking about off-site improvements like roads, intersections that perhaps carry a tremendous amount of traffic, and a development puts maybe 1% of adds a 1% increase, right? We have to figure out the proportionality of that impact so that we have that development pay for that 1%, but we have an intersection that carries lots of traffic. So that rough proportionality analysis is sometimes hard to do, but that is our constitutional obligation, and that comes up with respect to Holly Lane and Swan Lane, or Swan Road, right? We want these roads to connect all the way from Holcomb to Redland, right? But we don't have a development probably that will include all the land to get all the way that distance, and that land probably will not generate enough trips to build a collector or an arterial, I can't remember what's in the plan, level of service. So the other thing is that new development doesn't have to pay for shortcomings that exist today, right? That's on the city's dime. And so what we're looking at probably, and what I've set forth in my memo, is some kind of acquisition of this property if the city is determined to have these roads in place to serve existing development or to serve something less than an amount of new development that necessitates the entire road. The other real challenge with this idea of condemnation or negotiation, acquiring this property to develop a road, we don't know where the road will go because we don't know what the development around it will serve it, right? I mean, where are we going to put the road? We kind of would have to develop the surrounding properties. I mean, we'd have to come up with a plan for what units will be there and where it will be. And so there's a lot that goes into this question of providing Swan Lane and Holly Lane, or Swan Road and Holly Lane. And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying there's a lot to it. And that's the point I'm trying to make in the memo. The next issue that I've highlighted for the Planning Commission's consideration has to do with clear and objective standards. And we've beat this dead horse a bunch of times. And unfortunately, it is critical that we continue to realize that we cannot apply standards that require the exercise of discretion. And criteria that require discretion are those that could come to you could interpret them to have two different meanings. right? If you can interpret a standard to have more than one meaning, then it's discretionary and it cannot be applied to housing. So in addition to that, which we've talked about a lot, we also know from a more recent case, a case in Cannon Beach, that the development of housing is not the clear and objective standard that applies to the development of housing is not constrained only to the building of a house itself. It applies to the things that the house needs, like a driveway, like a road, like a certain amount of landscaping, like the code requires certain things as part of a condition of building a house, and those things also must be clear and objective. And so the question comes, well, what about parkland? The obligation to develop parkland is not a core function of a need for a house, right? So could we put in a whole different section of the code a requirement that a new development has to build a park or dedicate land for a park and keep it completely separate from housing? And my answer to that question is, I don't know, because the courts haven't tested it. But what I can say is that LUBA in this Cannon Beach said that this clear and objective obligation to apply to the development of housing is broad. They've said that. And the way we've been determining rough proportionality for parkland when it comes to housing is by the number of houses proposed. If the obligation for the impact evaluation is based on the number of houses and the number of people living in the houses, that connects it with the development of housing. Do you see what I'm saying? So we'd have to think of another way to impose the obligation that was not housing triggered in order to get it separated enough. And even then, I think it's quite risky. So I think we need to do clear and objective standards for parkland dedication, and that's what staff is working on that front. We talked, Aquila mentioned the need to amend the PPCP, the Park Place Concept Plan. We know that the Park Place Concept Plan is not clear and objective in a lot of respects, right? And we know that we have to make it clear and objective if we're going to get it to apply to housing. So what we need is zoning regulations, municipal code standards that achieve what the concept plan envisions. We don't need to amend the concept plan itself, because if we did that, then we wouldn't have the alternative discretionary track that the law allows us to have. We can have a discretionary track if we have a clear and objective track. So what we're trying to do with the code amendments is make a clear and objective track, and we keep our concept plan discretionary track, and then we have two tracks. And we think that's the best way to go about it. And so that's why we're doing what we're doing. The other thing is, by amending the municipal code, we're building on the clear and objective standards we already have. And the next part of my memo talks about the changes in the middle housing requirements, eliminating density mostly. We can adjust lot sizes, but we can't regulate density in lots, and except for in certain circumstances, which we've set forth in my memo. And that's another reason why we want to build on the work we've already done. The city's already implemented the middle housing obligations for under state law. So we want to build on that and not reinvent the wheel for the Park Place concept plan. I talk a little bit in my memo about, 1573, Senate Bill 1573, which is the new state law that requires local governments to waive certain standards if a developer asks for those standards to be waived. And, I think we have to just be aware that waiver possibility is out there. The law does provide an avenue for local governments to be exempt from the obligation to grant waivers, but we aren't far enough down the path to know whether whether or not Oregon City qualifies for that exemption. So I just think we need to be aware that that broad waiver, mandatory adjustment authority is out there, and think about that as we're implementing the new code. Provision of parkland, I talk a little bit about the need for an 8 to 10 acre community park in the north side and a 3 to 5 acre neighborhood park in the south. The same standards apply to the parkland discussion as applied to the Holly Lane discussion, which is we've got an obligation to be roughly proportional, and we can't take, we can't exact more land than a development proposes. And that's tough when we've got a park located, here, and we got a development proposed here. We can't get land for a park here when the development is over here. And we also can't get 8 to 10 acres if the development doesn't necessitate 8 to 10 acres. So what staff is talking about is a fee in lieu that would allow this development over here to fund these improvements or acquisition of the land in order to get it. Rezoning the land from some residential zone to a park zone isn't going to help the situation in any respect, because in order to zone it, if we were to zone it with a park designation, the only thing that would be allowed would be park. And that would give rise to a Measure 49 claim, which is when local government regulates land and reduces its value, a applicant can come and ask for waiver of that standard or reimbursement, and a takings claim. So we need the parkland afloat, because then it can be identified, its location can be determined at the time that development is proposed. Finally, protecting the neighborhood commercial zone. Whether or not you change the policies to exclude stormwater detention or parkland from the neighborhood commercial zone is a policy question for you. But as long as the neighborhood commercial standards have standards regulating mixed use or multifamily development, those standards have to be clear and objective. And then finally, green on-site stormwater treatment. I just want to highlight again, the city has adopted low-impact development stormwater standards. And those standards were adopted in 2015 after the Park Place concept plan was adopted. And those design standards set forth a priority scheme for the treatment of stormwater, which says first you have to do green streets or green containment. And if you can't do that, then there's, you do local treatment or on-site treatment. And then if you can't do that, you do, I can't remember how, the priority scheme is individual property all the way down to regional treatment. And that in essence, I believe, is what green street stormwater treatment is intended to be in the concept plan. In other words, the concept plan called for this, and the LID standards do it, and it applies citywide. So it's going to be up to the commission to decide if that is enough to satisfy the concept plan or not. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments or, anything at this point, but I wanted to sort of set the stage of the legal bounds right now with the expectation that we're going to talk about these concepts further as things move along.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Laws, you have your hand on the button. Go ahead.
So you're saying, obviously, we're getting some clarification on clear and objective. Do you have any recommendations on how we could be more clear and objective in any case, or are we just kind of saying we can't be, basically?
Well, I'm not, so I don't think, my first point is there's no such thing as more clear and objective. it's kind of like being more pregnant, right? You either are or you aren't, right? I mean, it's not like more, you don't get brownie points for being more clear and objective, right? The bar is high enough as it is. What I think our strategy is, one, look at what other communities are doing. Tigard has done some concept planning, and we're trying to capitalize on what other at Tigard, Wilsonville are doing with concept plans that are working. We're trying to every time I read through something, I find more things that are not clear and objective. Right? And I hope that you're able to do that too and say to us, hey, is this clear and objective? Is this clear and objective? Because it's sort of like you have to keep that in your mind every time. But I don't have any other silver bullet ideas.
So what was this example at Cannon Beach of how it wasn't a clear and objective? What was that example?
It was a road standard. There's a very steep road that would serve this house, and so the city had standards about how a road can be built, and those standards were not clear and objective. Even though the road served the house, it was a public road. So that's what the issue was there, and the argument was that is a road. It has nothing to do with the house. And LUBA said, sorry, it's broad. It includes anything associated with anything necessary to build a house.
Commissioner LaSalle?
Is it required that a neighborhood commercial zone be included?
Does state law require that there be a neighborhood commercial zone?
Or a city code or regulation or anything?
There is no state law that there has to be a commercial zone. The plan calls for a commercial zone.
Yeah. And a new application has just been submitted for that area. What we do from this point forward, will our changes apply to that application, or
no?
Will they be? I didn't think so. So whatever we do from this point forward in regard to the Park Place concept plan area will not affect, they will still comply to the old plan.
That is correct.
Code.
Thank you.
If I could make a clarification, we don't have a land use application. We have a request for a pre-application meeting, which...
We do have a land division application.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a pre-application conference and an expedited land division, two separate things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the very first phase of the Park Place crossing has been submitted and is in completeness review as of last week.
And does the applicant have a choice between the existing standard or the new standard if they so desire in its entirety, one way or the other?
In this case, it's a straight subdivision.
Okay.
For the pre-app, the application for the land division is an expedited land division based on current code. And that is a type 2 review, a shorter time frame for approval by staff. Public comment is the same period of time, 14 days. The appeal, there is an appeal, but it has to be to a land use referee who is evaluating only the criteria.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner LaSalle, do you have a question?
Well, I sent an email, comprehensive email to Aquila, and I think she passed it on to the rest of you. I guess my next question is, I need to be prompted on what point in time I need to have those questions addressed.
All right, any other questions for Ms. Richter? No? All right.
Okay, now the fun stuff. So I have 20 slides, and I assume you've all read your packets.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt a minute?
Yeah, sure.
I think our next agenda item was to actually go through
The key elements.
the key elements, and we'll go ahead and pull up, we can either just, I guess I'll ask the commission, we can leave this slide up, or if you like, we can pull up the memo that's in your packet and kind of walk through each of the sections that way. I'm not sure how many comments or questions there are in each section, or what you feel would be the best use of your time.
My recollection is that for each one of these elements, there's maybe one or two choices for each of them. I think it'd be helpful to see that
Okay.
on the screen
Yeah.
for each element.
Yeah, so we can pull that up. Not all of them have options, some of them do, so we can walk through that. And then, I guess, Commissioner LaSalle, with your list of questions, I think, I feel like some of them will get addressed as we go through these next two sections of the presentation. So maybe we can kind of hold them to the end and then see which ones we didn't answer for you.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Okay, great, thanks. I don't think. Yeah, that. Mhm. And, okay, all right, so the first item, so basically what we did is started with just these kind of key items that were identified in the concept plan, and then tried to kind of go through and do a bit of a matrix to see where they had been implemented or where they hadn't. So the first item is the Holly Lane and Swan extension, and why don't you scroll down a bit to the end, and then, up just, there you go, and then, let's make it really big. Okay, there we go. Yes, perfect. All right, so I guess I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing what those elements are because I think you know what they are, probably heard months of testimony about them. So a couple of things. They're already in our TSP. The TSP was adopted. The TSP means Transportation System Plan. The Transportation System Plan was adopted in 2013, and so it incorporated a number of different concept plan collectors and arterials, whether that was Park Place or maybe Thimble Creek, maybe South End. So these were kind of the options that were in there is just kind of leave it as it is because they're already adopted in the TSP. When I wrote this, we thought we were going to be updating the TSP shortly, but we got some news that this state kind of ran out of funding for helping us update our TSP, so it might be a little bit later. So that another way to think about that option is if we want to take those two projects and look at ways that they can be funded. They were originally identified for long-term, but in 2013, projecting out 11 years to now, they're now within that long-term range, if that makes sense. So they're kind of, I'll say, ripe at this point. And then the third thing that came up, I heard when City Commissioner Mike Mitchell was on the Planning Commission, he had asked if there was a way to identify a certain number of trips on local roads that would trigger the improvement of the full extent of the roads. And so that presents, there's kind of some things we'd have to wade through based on what Carrie just described to us. So that's kind of the first one. So any thoughts that you want to share or feedback on that?
Commissioner LaSalle?
Well, my choice was choice number 2, to change them to short-term priorities, which would possibly then open up grants, pursuing grant funding and any other funding that we might be able to have. The number of trips on item 3 proved unworkable in the last development because those trip numbers can be adjusted to whatever is possible. I would choose number 2.
Anyone else?
Just making sure I understood your comment when you were saying that now, in terms of timelines, you know, they're long-term projects and they're right. Identifying them as short-term, I mean, is there any implications there, or, you know, taking something that is right because it was identified long-term and classifying it short-term, does that really do anything?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think I actually would need to discuss more with Dana Webb, our city engineer, because she really manages the projects in the TSP, and she manages just about all of our capital projects. So I would want to understand from her, you know, what we could do with that. I think the one piece that I understand, and maybe she would correct me on this, is when we go through the regional transportation system plan that Metro puts together, the RTP, there are certain criteria to get your projects on that list, and then that kind of opens it up for additional funding. And so I don't know if being short-term helps with that. It may be that these are not, they're not identified as arterials, and so I'm not sure if arterial has to be one of the classifications. But if there's a desire to understand changing that prioritization, I will go back to the city engineer and we will discuss that.
Does it make any sense to look at tools like an LID or a zone of benefit for the construction of roadways, intersections, other improvements? I know they do that for sewers, not so much roads, sometimes intersections, but I'm not sure. It's hard for me to figure out whether or not it would actually feasibly apply here. I don't know.
And an LID being a
local improvement district.
Okay, thank you.
But that presumes that there would be people there, landowners there, that would be able to vote 51% on passing that. But the zone of benefit, of course, you could conceivably have a group of landowners that would be there. Landowner A would construct the street that would run through, you know, land parcels B, C, and D. They'd build the roadway, and parcels B, C, and D would eventually pay them back once they developed. But I'm not sure. I mean, maybe we're just looking at that as a fairy tale at this point, but
yeah,
maybe
I'm
a tool we
not
can
really
consider.
too sure how the local improvement district works within the current city limit. I'd want to get John Lewis's input on that,
Yeah.
but we should certainly come back and
yeah, I mean, I think zone of benefit would be a little softer, you know, tool, because that allows people to. That really, I mean, it really just depends upon whether or not you can do enough arm twisting to get the initial property owner to fund the roadway. And there might be some impetus to do that if they want to develop and, you know, have this whole thing come to fruition. And it might be in their best interest to do that, with the idea that, you know, other property owners, and I'm saying this without really knowing
exactly what the property owner makeup is in that area to see whether or not that even be feasible. But just throwing it out there as a possible solution for this, immovable object in terms of building a through roadway, which seems to be the kind of the central issue of this.
Yeah, in the Park Place concept plan, the very last section of the plan, there's a very general discussion of ways to finance public improvements. And it's pretty old. But that's where it is. It talks a little bit about LID, it talks about advanced finance districts and bonds, you name it. And it goes through those in a very general way, just pointing that out. So, yeah.
If a local improvement district was feasible, could they be made to comply with the road construction standards and cross sections laid out in the TSP, or can they sort of design their own road cross section?
Yeah, I think the design of the roads and the financing are they're related, but it wouldn't change the minimum requirements of the streets and roads.
I would think they'd have to meet all the standards, yeah.
Yeah. And then if a developer came in and did low-income stuff with the property tax exclusion, then that would kind of get rid of that money for that, if that's related to our earlier presentation.
I don't know.
I don't know either. Okay.
Well,
Get back to the topic. No, it's a good discussion to have.
What I can do is take these ideas back and talk with the city engineer, and then we can bring back some answers and more discussion on that. Part of the schedule of what we're going to review is to bring back potential TSP, Transportation System Plan amendments, kind of after we go through all the code. So I can go back and have those discussions and get some more answers, and maybe I can ask Dana to come present when we get to that piece. So I'm thinking that's probably one of our July meetings that we would follow up with that.
And I think a good homework assignment for us would be to look at the CIP to see if there are other higher priority items, because I would hate to choose something out of here, that would take priority over something that maybe is even more important than this. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
All right, Commissioner LaSalle.
I think further on in the documents here, references to Clackamas County TSP does not have the Holly Lane extension in it. And so one of my questions on down the line was, how do we go about getting the county to include that in their TSP for possible funding support?
Yeah, that's it's a good question, and we've started talking with the staff at the county who are going to manage that TSP project, and I think the kind of high level answer is we have to be part of their technical advisory committee. The city needs to participate in their TSP when they're amending it, and then continue to voice, what projects we really feel like need to be in their TSP. I think the other part of that is we need to identify what the mutual benefit is to them for including that, and how it serves their residents as well. But we basically just need to be part of that TSP update process and continue to work on that. And we've already talked to them about these roads and just in general working with them when they update their TSP.
One of the things that comes to my mind immediately for an advantage to them would be an additional exit route for wildfires.
Is there anything in the urban growth management agreement? Probably, yeah, you're smiling, and I think that is a no. And maybe that's not even the appropriate tool to use to have the county sort of be in parity with the city in terms of what their interests are in transportation. I don't know.
So our urban growth management area agreement is very outdated, and it requires great political will to open it back up. So it comes up. We talk about it. I think I talked about it very recently, actually, but yeah. Okay, we ready to?
Yep. I'm going to bring something up. This is kind of a older situation that is pretty much exactly what the Commissioner SB was talking about. It's a little older and it's kind of third-hand information, so it's probably about 40% correct. I don't know if anybody remembers Top of Scott Golf Course in Happy Valley. Okay. All right, that was turned into what's called Eagle Landing. And at the time, the city and the developer they got to an impasse where neither could agree who's going to put the big road in. From what I've heard, they came to an agreement where the city said, okay, we promise we'll reimburse you for the road when you build it. The developer was able to take that agreement to obtain financing to do the road work, which was a pretty big road. It went up the hill, served condominiums, served mixed use, and then there was some word about putting the Happy Valley City Hall up there at a later time. They couldn't come to an agreement on that, so that didn't happen. But the road went in, the development went in, and then after it was done, and there was some tax income coming in from the property taxes, then as far as I know, the city bought the road, paid for the road, reimbursed the developer. So there is an existing example of that, and it's not that far away from us, and it seemed to have worked as best as I can remember, and that's what I heard. That was it.
Those kinds of development agreements work really well when you have a single developer building a big piece, right? Because then there's incentive on both sides to enter into a development agreement. It's kind of like a contract, and you can be a lot more creative. That's harder when you have piecemeal development, that doesn't develop the whole thing. But a good example, and one we'll look into.
All right, so getting back to the options, Commissioner LaSalle has expressed a desire to go with number 2. Any discussion, other options, support, opposition?
I think I agree with that. Number 3 is probably a little extreme because that would maybe paint us into a corner that we may not be able to foresee in the future.
Go ahead. All right.
I support number 2.
Okay, consensus for number 2 then? All right, sounds good. Number 2 it is.
Great, thank you. Okay, if you want to, thank you. So this next element was about the 2 distinct villages. And with this one, I don't think you know what, I'm just going to take them out, sorry, so I can remember what I said. Okay, so I didn't present any options, and that is because you will see some proposed code revisions to chapter 17.10. So some of these elements, like we introduced, have already been adopted in some way, some haven't, some of them need refining. So this particular one of 2 distinct mixed-use neighborhoods that accommodate a certain number of dwelling units, we are attempting to get at that through changes to chapter 1710, which is the medium density chapter, and then several chapters that you're not necessarily going to see tonight. You'll probably see at your next meeting. So I think that's how we're getting at this particular one. But I will pause and see if there's any input on that.
Anyone? No. All right.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to keep going here. Okay, we've talked a little bit about the neighborhood oriented commercial nodes. And I guess I just want to read this one because I think this concept is important from the concept plan. I'm just reading the title, I'm not going to read all the words. Neighborhood-oriented commercial nodes that integrate commercial land uses, residential land uses, and public open space. So I wasn't there, but I feel like this was a key tenet of that Park Place concept plan, is having these nodes in both the North Village and the South Village. So I feel like there's been some public comment about limiting what can go into those neighborhood commercial nodes. And I think we just want to be very cognizant of what the concept plan was trying to achieve in these like very small mixed-use areas. Here again, we have some proposed code revisions. I don't think, and Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we had neighborhood commercial until the concept plan was adopted in 2008, because the only places that exist right now is Park Place and Thimble Creek. So it was kind of developed specifically for that area, but we have identified some additional refinements that would apply just to Park Place, and there's some refinements that were previously done for the Thimble Creek area. So you will see this chapter probably at the next meeting, probably June 24th meeting. But again, I'll pause and see if anybody has any questions, comments on neighborhood commercial.
I question whether that neighborhood commercial should even be there. I would recommend we eliminate it, because unless the connection, Holly Lane connection, is made to Redland Road, that commercial zone would essentially be at a dead end. And I, for one, would never want to establish a business at the end of a dead-end road, hoping that those people in the development would use my business primarily. It doesn't make sense to me to have that commercial area there.
And is your thought to eliminate it completely or move it, just out of curiosity?
Well, the only practical way or position to move it to would be up nearer Holcomb Boulevard, which would make it nearer a main thoroughfare where you get a lot of people coming and going, a lot of traffic. If it wasn't relocated up there, I don't see any purpose in even having it.
Is there, are you talking about removing that from the concept plan? Because it has to be in the code for Thimble Creek as a zone. So removing it would be modifying the concept plan. Would that be the actual way it would be done?
I think at this point, it's already zoned because it's annexed. I don't know that we would remove it from the concept plan, but it would be a zone change and probably a comprehensive plan amendment as well.
And I think if we were going to do a comprehensive plan amendment, which we would have to do in order to do the zone change, we would amend the plan as part of that, because we wouldn't want the inconsistency.
Would it be possible, piggybacking off of that, would it be possible to change the code, since we're going to change the code anyway, to make it specific to Park Place concept plan area where maybe we get rid of that 50% thing to where it could be residential, but then in the future, if it's not a dead end road, a commercial, use could be put in. We still allow for that, but it's not necessarily required.
All right, so are you suggesting to it, by removing 50%, does that mean that there could be there could be a building that's completely residential?
Yeah,
okay.
But you leave it in there. Basically, you have the option in the future of, I want to convert this residential street level unit to a commercial use.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be a way to sort of implement that idea?
And also, what about live, work?
Sure.
Yeah, I would support that if it was live work and
I like
there was
live work.
still some commercial integrated in there. And then to piggyback on that, rather than remove it completely, I would think that maybe we could just look at or focus on the types of uses that are in the neighborhood commercial zone, as being uses that serve that immediate area, and maybe take a good look at the demographics and what that neighborhood would need, and then provide a shopping list of uses that would be allowable in that zone.
Sure, okay. Yeah, there's quite a wide variety of uses that are allowed because it carries with it everything from our mixed-use corridor uses. I guess I want to, I don't know if I heard correctly, so it sounds like maybe there was a suggestion to allow all residential buildings, but I don't know that I heard consensus. Was there, and again, this will come through when we look at the code requirements, but I think it would be helpful as we're going into that. So where did that discussion land?
So I'm going to continue to rally for neighborhood commercial uses in those areas, because that's a far-flung area and it's very underserved commercially, and it just doesn't make any sense. People are complaining bitterly about lots of traffic on Holcomb Road, and most of that's being generated from going to other businesses in Oregon City proper. So I think if you have, like a dry cleaners or a convenience store or a small restaurant or, other kinds of things that serve that neighborhood, it would make a lot more sense to have those things as opposed to not.
And so
I think one thing that would help is in the last development proposal, they had a locked gate there at that end of Holly Lane connected to LifeSafe.
Yeah.
If it was a condition of approval, or if they just didn't include it at all, to have that a through street, that would help.
Yeah.
So my counterpoint to that would be that if we do require commercial, the commercial space exists, whether it gets filled or not is up to private industry.
Right.
And there's a development with which I'm familiar in the city of, I think it's in Wood Village, I don't think it's quite in Fairview. Anyway, 238th and Halsey, where those commercial units have been vacant for the 3 or 4 years that the project has been completed. And it kind of doesn't look great. So that would be my counterpoint to requiring the commercial.
I did like your idea, though, of looking at that 50% requirement. I think there's maybe some flexibility in that, because that's going to be the obstacle that a private developer is going to look at. Like right now, it won't pencil with that requirement. So if you give that flexibility, allowing for future commercial to be plugged in, achieving the walkable neighborhood, I think that Commissioner Espy's talking about, that might be a path forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we've put this in any of the packets just yet because we haven't gotten to that section of code, but there's a memorandum from Johnson Economics that talks about the viability of that neighborhood commercial area and what will be necessary for it to be a viable, small scale, walkable neighborhood commercial area. And it's dependent on rooftops nearby, as well as having decent access via the Holly Lane connection. So there's a lot of things in play, and none of that really has anything to do with the large market draw of the bigger shopping centers in the vicinity, which people are still going to continue to shop at. So
I go to Total Bliss Bakery on Central Point Road.
I beg pardon?
I go to Total Bliss Bakery on Central Point Road.
Yeah.
And I have to get right there at 9 o'clock. Otherwise, if I want a certain thing, it's gone by 9:30. Anyway, anecdotal, sorry.
So one thing to mention here is obviously we're talking about future space, possibly commercial, and you're living up in Park Place. Obviously, it's a little bit off the grid, and we've been talking about future, space. In the meantime is, the futuristic, the Strong Towns was mentioned, is having a community gathering area in the meantime. They're doing urban gardens in the meantime, which is attracting a lot of people at this point. having like, you know, a gathering area. I mean, part of this strong town concepts actually makes sense, you know, having front porches. I know that that's some of the plans anyways, but here's the concept is in the meantime, there's going to be a dead end, right? And part of being up in Park Place is kind of farmland. It's going to be a transition. So in the meantime, you know, we're seeing farmers markets is having that transition of commercial space that's not really developed, where you have these high-end stores that are high rent, where people can't afford to rent from them, is having more affordable commercial space in the meantime.
All right. So consensus on that, or do we want to punt that to the next, to when we get to that point and for a hearing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we have proposed some revisions to this chapter, and so that'll come to you, but before we get to a hearing. And I think what I'm hearing though is to leave it, but we may want to go back and look at some flexibility in, and maybe we can bounce around some different ideas for that, how much residential should be, or it's limited to versus can it be all residential? And then we can take another look at the uses that are allowed through mixed-use corridor and what those kind of transitional uses might look like, so.
And my recollection from going through the Thimble Creek process is that we put into code certain sentences or sections within a zoning district that applied only to Thimble Creek, so we could do the same for this as well.
Yeah, yes, and that is what you will see,
Okay.
yeah.
Can you scroll down? There's the options is off the screen.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we covered that.
Yeah, so these options, so I think we just kind of talked about number 2.
Sure did.
Number 1, I think, is kind of a bigger picture idea that will require, you know, the city developing some land, purchasing and developing some land. So that's certainly something for the city commission to chew on. And if that's, you can make that recommendation as well as part of your work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll keep going. So an area for a new civic institution such as a library or community center, and that is currently allowed in the neighborhood commercial zone. Again, we have proposed some revisions, and so this kind of goes back to the same element we were just talking about. But again, that would come up in the uses itself, and you'll see that when we talk through that neighborhood commercial chapter. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Okay, a mix of housing types and ranges of affordability. I feel like that was another kind of strong component that people wanted to see in the Park Place concept plan area. So again, let's see, let me go all the way down to options. Okay, first, let me start here, and then we'll look at the options. So we have proposed some revisions to the medium density and to chapter 1721 to require some housing diversity. And actually, that's in your packet tonight. You'll see that. That is intended to get at a diversity of housing, and kind of, I think, as a side benefit, hopefully would be some different ranges of affordability. And there are some, I think there is a code revision that talks about a density bonus in conjunction with providing affordable housing. So you'll see that. We can talk through that. So the options were lot averaging, and I think if I'm reading the tea leaves right, and from what I've heard, there's not really a desire to do lot averaging again. If I'm right about that, I think the city commission maybe chewed on that for quite a while. So that was suggested in the concept plan, but I'm not sure that we actually want to go back to that idea. And then the other option that I just mentioned is this density bonus. And so that will come up as you're reviewing the code, and we can kind of talk through the benefits and concerns with that one, the burdens and the benefits. Okay, number 6, extensive system of off-street and on-street trails.
I'd like
Yes,
to go
sorry.
back to that
Go ahead.
last option. Element number 5. I agree with the lot averaging continue to be eliminated. Let's not go to that route again. However, if developers propose affordable housing, I think there needs to be a verification system in place to be sure that their ultimate housing development is truly affordable, or a percentage of it anyway.
Yeah, it's that enforcement piece that's always kind of, that we always talk about, kind of, we're not sure how that actually gets implemented and enforced over time.
Yeah. But it needs to be in place. Something needs to be in place.
Yeah.
I got a question on that. When we put it in there like that, to provide affordable housing units, are we talking about the definition of affordable housing like we heard in the previous presentation, that there's county involved, state involved, or are we talking about affordability where they just sell some units cheaper? What definition are we talking about there?
I think what we put in that code, and I think actually that's part of your packet tonight, is that we define it as that 30% household income. I think we define it around the whatever the area median income is at the time of development.
Yeah, what's currently drafted is very specific, and it is for multifamily affordable housing, which is not permitted in the R5 zone, but
that makes sense.
Could hypothetically be allowed if a developer sought a zone change to R3.5 and proposed multifamily in that zone, but neither of those things has occurred. There's no R3.5 zoning in the Park Place concept plan. It's all R5. And I'll explain why we're considering this for Park Place as in my next slide.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I will keep moving. So the extensive system of off-street and on-street trails, pedestrian and bicycle connections. With this one, so that there's quite a number of trails that are in the concept plan. Some of them on-street means that they, would follow Holly Lane or Swan Lane, so there's sidewalk, bike paths. I'm not sure if we identified them as being like, a multi-use path, and one side of the road is got this like 12-foot wide pathway, or if it's just, we want sidewalk and bike on both sides of the roadway. There's also a number of off-street trails, and I think, I'm not sure what the second, okay, so one of the ideas, I'm sorry, this is on 2 different pages, but we are intending anyway to bring you an option to look at updating the TSP's trail plan, basically, so that we can there's a couple of, not regional, but there's a couple of trails that were identified in the Oregon City Trails Master Plan that for whatever reason aren't in the Park Place area, that for whatever reason didn't make it to the TSP. If those are adopted into the TSP, then we have a better ability to require that dedication. If development comes through and there's trail on their property, then we can ask for that dedication, at least of the land. That is part of a chapter that you will see, I think, at the next meeting. So that part is coming up. let's see. Okay, let me keep moving here. And I think originally I'm not sure, I guess we lost a connection, but I think originally I had thought that we could just weave that into our next TSP update. Oh, the camera turned off. I don't know if that's the problem. But we will end up just making an amendment to the TSP because we know that it's out further, a few more years than we originally thought. Okay. And we probably can do that. I'll have to talk. I don't want to speak too soon. I was about to say we could probably do that without consultant help, but I'm not totally sure if we need to just engage our transportation consultant in that one. Let's see. So I guess these are kind of the other options. And I think we've kind of worked through these ideas a little bit more since I drafted this. So updating code standards to require proportional dedication, that you'll see that in that code revision. And then if we are able to kind of update that TSP section, it would show the specific locations of some of those trails. There's quite a number of trails that just fall into the natural resource overlay area that really can't be developed anyway. So we kind of have to think through how we're going to get there on that one.
Trails they're a permitted use in the NROD anyway, if I remember correctly.
I think you can have a trail, but not paved.
Well, there's, within the Natural Resource Overlay District, there are exemptions for certain types of soft trails. But other trails that are paved and wider than 5 feet are considered new impervious surface that has to go through a land use process and go through mitigation as well. So it's not that you can't develop hard trails within the NROD, you can, but they have to be as far away from the resource as you can. And then if you do impact that vegetative corridor, you have to do mitigation with native plants. So.
Gotcha, thank you.
Could you scroll it down to include option 1? Okay, back up again then.
I'm sorry.
Back up again to 2 and 3.
Oh.
Yeah, I would recommend option 3. Leave it up to the development.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that? No? All right.
I think it's hard when you do number 3, it's hard to be able to exact the trail because if it's not, I mean, would it be identified on a map anywhere or is it just there conceptually or?
Well, I think that acknowledge piece would mean that we need to put it on a map, right?
Yeah, because I mean, if there isn't any hard location of where the trail is, then, the city has an uphill battle in being able to negotiate to have a trail located when they do their development.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, so probably what we're actually looking at is a combination of 1 and 3, right?
Yeah.
Getting a map with where some of these trails would go, and then we can look at least requiring the dedication during the development.
Yeah, and then it depends upon whether or not the map is accepted versus adopted formally by ordinance.
So, I'm sorry.
If the map is adopted by ordinance, then there would be some, authority on where those trails would be located as opposed to.
Oh, well, if it's an update to our TSP, that's.
Or if it's in, if it's in the TSP,
ordinance.
then.
Yeah.
Is that where it would go?
I think that's what it would have to be.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I will keep moving. So innovative green on-site stormwater treatment methods. So Carrie just spent some time talking through this in her legal issues memo. And I believe, and so this kind of has the same thing that we had on the slide and what Carrie talked about, this level, these different levels of stormwater treatment. Sorry to keep scrolling. So it starts with this on-site retention. And then we're looking at stormwater management using LID, off-site or regional facilities, and then fee and lieu. And, you know, I've talked through this with our assistant city engineer, and I believe that this piece of the concept plan has been adopted, and I'm not sure there's more we can do. So I will leave it at that. I'll pause for a second. I don't know if there were comments on that piece. Okay. Okay, protect sensitive areas, including drainages and steep slopes. I didn't talk too much about this because the Natural Resource Overlay District and the Geologic Hazards Overlay does just that. So those two chapters were adopted, implemented, and cover this area and will cover future areas that annex in. This one's a little tricky. Streets and buildings oriented for solar access. When we went through some of the public hearings with the development proposal, I didn't hear much about the need for solar access. And so there were a lot of folks who brought comments about their involvement in the concept plan development back in 2008. And so that's where I'm getting the sense of what things were important. And I haven't heard much about the need for solar access. We did put some, I'm gonna just scroll down a little bit. We did put some code language, potential code language in that you can look at into the chapter 1721 about how buildings are cited for solar access. I am very reluctant to, this is a policy decision, but I'm not sure how we can orient the streets for solar access. It seems like a very tough challenge, especially given the topography out there. So I'm just not sure that that one is achievable. Let's see. So the options were adding that back into the master plan unit development code, if that's one place to put it. Oh, and I guess that's the only option I presented, but I'll pause and see if there's any comments on solar access.
Go with Dirk first this time, sorry.
The problem I see with that one is you would negatively affect one property owner and positively affect another. So it'd be kind of an unfair policy. One person could be perfectly aligned and the other person is undevelopable over that reason. So it makes no sense.
I would have to refer back to previous meeting. I referred to a statement on page 19 that section in regard to solar design had been removed. Mm-hmm. And I'd recommend that it stay removed.
Yeah, anyone disagree with that? No, all right. I think that was probably aspirational back in 2008. Now things are a little different. It is what it is.
Dreamers.
Okay. Great. Okay. So this, number 10, the use of green edges to define neighborhoods and buffer developments. So originally, I think the thought of how that got implemented was through that Natural Resource Overlay District. We have added some additional provisions for buffering on the northern, in the North Village, I guess, kind of on the northern edge of the concept plan area. So you'll see that. That's in the code sections that we're about to look at. Let's see. There was, the concept plan talked about prohibiting development on slopes greater than 25%. And that's not something that's in our geologic hazard code right now. I think one of the things that we talked about is that it could limit development, and it could actually just shift and concentrate density if that becomes a code requirement. If it's something that you're interested in or want to consider, I think we'd have to go back and kind of do some detailed analysis of the land to figure out if that would result in any takings. We didn't do that with constructing this memo, but that would kind of be a next step on that one. And we have not proposed in any of these, I think this is correct. I think we have not proposed any changes to the geologic hazard code with Park Place, with these current code revisions, so.
Bearing in mind the last amendment was fairly recent with the landslide 200-foot buffer.
Okay. That was like 21 or?
21, I think, yeah.
Okay.
My notes tell me that this is a bit of a slippery slope, and I would stay with current code.
Thank you, and I appreciate the pun.
Go ahead. Okay. Can we scroll back up just a little bit?
Yeah.
Keep going to the top. So the green edges. So this is not exactly what's addressed in this, but the green edges, so if, let's say the North Village gets developed by 3 different developers and 3 different projects, is there a green edge between each of those projects, or is it green edge around the edge of the concept plan area?
Concept plan.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. I'm just concerned about further, dividing the neighborhoods by when they were developed, by whom.
Okay. All right. And our last one, parks and open space. So this is, I think, a pretty important part of the concept plan. And again, Carrie kind of covered what some of our options are. We have proposed some pretty specific revisions to parkland dedication. And so you will see that in chapter 1762 revisions. That's not part of your packet tonight, but that'll come before you probably at the next meeting. I think we actually have an example because there was a similar code put in place for Thimble Creek, and so we used that to kind of start at least a good starting place of how we can make this work. So I think that was one of the issues that we ran into when we had the last development proposal, is that we really didn't have a clear and objective way to require a certain amount of parkland. And so this would put it in the code and make it a numerical calculation. And Commissioner Laws, to go back much earlier to a question you asked, I think one way to think about clear and objective is if it is measurable in some way. They're not always going to be measurable, but if you can apply a measurement or a calculation or something that, can't be, like Carrie said, misinterpreted. And so for me, I tend to think is this something that we can find a way to measure it? We can't always, but that's one way to get at it. Okay, is any comments, questions on the park and open space piece?
Doesn't appear so.
All right. That is all of them then. Thank you.
Great. We've been at it for just about 2 hours. Are everybody good to take 7-minute break, something like that? That's a good question.
The code revisions. So Pete's got a number of slides to go through.
Yeah, 20 slides. I was going to run through them pretty quick. I also wanted to ask if you want to allow public comment before that or after the break, or?
I'd be inclined to take a break and allow public comment when we come back and then do that. Is that agreeable with the rest of the commission? Okay, let's do that. Let's do 5 minutes. What time is it? Come back we'll make it 6, 9:02. Oh, we're on air.
Recording in progress.
All right, we'll get back to the meeting tonight. Do public testimony on item 3. Michael, I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name the first time, but come on up and if you'd like to say anything.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate the ideas of Commissioner Schleckenhofer, who said that there's other alternative ideas close to us where we could learn from how to get those roads built. And I very much believe in the phrase, build it and they will come. And that all of the time, effort, and energy that's being put into, I'm understanding tonight now, there's an expedited application for development in the same area. It's just going to bring all the neighbors back. We're going to come and we're going to talk about traffic. We're going to talk about Holcomb. We're going to talk about Redland Road. We're going to talk about concerns regarding the fires, getting people out of Holcomb, getting people out of Redland. All the communities upstream, we're just going to talk about the same things again, the very definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And it seems like cities across the country use, when necessary, eminent domain, invest resources to build the infrastructure to better the community. I saw one of the lines of the plan tonight from 2008 says 1,594 homes. If developed properly with the infrastructure first, that does nothing but benefit the city. City tax revenues go up. Infrastructure businesses get built. Jobs are created. People prosper. But it just seems to me that the emphasis needs to be all the energy, and I appreciate the idea of moving up the building of the roads to maybe a short-term priority from a long-term priority. If that isn't the starting point for this project, this is a very unique project in terms of, county, city. I realize there's lots of complications. Existing roads, a rural community, an urban suburban community, all coming together. It's not just, a simple development project, and I think we all know that. So I just want to really encourage the Planning Commission. If you haven't been in the area, there's so much going on. It's all interconnected. Clackamas County Housing Authority, Clackamas Heights getting rebuilt, Oregon City View Manor. I'm not sure what the gentleman from the nonprofit organization was speaking about. Was he speaking about Clackamas Heights, or is he talking about his organization developing Oregon City View Manor? Not to mention Ceres Farm, the airport's been developed, and then now, of course, Park Place. Square peg in a round hole, infrastructure, build it, and they will come. Thank you for the time.
All right, thank you. Next is Garrett Stevenson.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Garrett Stevenson. It's nice to be in front of you again after, I think it's been a couple of years now. And when I was hearing the gentleman speak, I sort of thought to myself, well, if ever there was a group of folks that know a lot about Park Place, it's the group I'm appearing before today. So I want to thank you and thank staff for considering all of these code changes and being willing to give me a chance to talk very briefly. I want to make 2 points. Number one is a lot of the questions that you're wrestling with, and I think appropriately so, have to do with development constraints versus what does the concept plan require. And as we wrestled with back in 2022, there are a number of things that concept plan wanted to happen that were either impractical or impossible. I think the question about the solar access, for example, is one of those things. How do you lay out roads to provide for solar access? I don't know. But the difficulty about the Park Place concept plan is the slope, and how do you make that all work when you are so constrained by so many competing priorities? For example, large numbers of units versus having to buffer the whole area from existing development, wanting certain types of road improvements plus alleys. All of this stuff is in tension from one way or another. And when it comes to questions that require, for example, we should probably talk to a civil engineer to see if that's actually feasible. I want to offer up the fact that my client, Icon, has done all of the engineering on this project when it attempted to produce a plan that would pass city muster to implement the Park Place concept plan. And so what I'd recommend that this commission do is ask staff to actually sit down with us, because as far as I know, we are still the sole or almost the sole landowner of all of the property that's going to be subject to this code when it comes into effect. And we are happy to go through and share with staff, share with you what we found when we did all of the detailed development work that we did, all of the engineering that we did. And whether or not you find that interesting or compelling is a second question. But we do think that some of that stuff would be worthwhile in your consideration. The second thing I wanted to say, and I think you're sort of on the right track already, is that when it comes to practical things, like how do you make commercial work when it's required to be a certain type of mixed use, when there's not yet a market for it, I would encourage this commission to keep that in mind as you're going forward. For example, with the commercial question, when we looked at trying to do commercial, part of the calculus was, what are those lots going to look like? How do we get commercial and a mixed use commercial on very, very narrow lots? And so that's one example where I think it really proves a broader truth, which is that the more flexibility that this code can allow for when we move forward, the better off the project is going to be, because nobody here wants to have either an unbuildable property, which I do have some concerns about, or components of the Park Place master plan that are constructed and are never viable or never successful. So those are the two comments I wanted to make. I really appreciate the fact that you guys are looking at the practical side and not just necessarily the abstract side of how you write development code. And I encourage you all to keep that in view as you move forward. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Stoll. So we've identified potential revisions to 7 sections of the municipal code. Tonight, we're just looking at 2 chapters and a 3rd chapter with definitions. We've also talked about the need to revise the transportation system plan and potentially other infrastructure master plans as those opportunities unfold. So the first chapter in your packet is the definitions chapter in 1704. Get it caught up here. Yep. All right, there we go. Most of these definitions are dealing with regulations that are already on the books but weren't defined. So some of them are words that are particular meanings in development, such as dedication, and others just deal with things like housing elements, such as awnings and canopies and green roofs. So we're just defining those terms, and we're not including any regulatory language in those terms. I've just included the ones that you see here. It's not an exhaustive list, and I'm sure there will be others that come up through the course of a review that we may need to define. For example, affordable housing. The main chapter, there we go. Thanks. The main chapter we're talking about is the R5 district, which implements the medium density residential designation in the Park Place concept plan area. The big change that we would be proposing here is not to the R5 zone, but to the R3.5 zone, because there are two zones in the medium density chapter, the R5 zone and the R3.5 zone. Currently, in the R3.5 zone in the rest of the city, you can propose multifamily development through a discretionary master plan process. And if that is proposed and approved, then you would go through site plan and design review for compliance with our multifamily design standards. We are proposing that multifamily be added as a permitted use within the R3.5 district only, remaining subject to those site plan and design review criteria. Currently, the only way you can do that is through a discretionary review process in that zone. So two things would need to happen in Park Place for this type of development to occur. The first thing would be a type 4 zone change that would go to the Planning Commission, City Commission. If that were approved, then multifamily as a permitted use becomes an option in the R3.5 zone in Park Place. And by doing that, we would increase the mix of housing types and ranges of affordability. Are there any comments about this idea? Okay. So concurrent with that, we'd be striking from the code the master plan section that requires, that allows multifamily through that discretionary review process. Next, we have the dimensional standards table. Sorry.
Could I interrupt?
Yes. Yes.
Do we need to approve each one of these
Not yet.
items?
Just
as we go
looking
through?
for comments at this point. We would like your general ideas and feelings about it, but
We don't need to approve them as we go along.
well, we're not officially approving anything tonight. We're just in a work session. Yeah. But if you have strong feelings about any of the amendments that we're going through, please let me know, or ways that they can be improved as well. 1710 contains a dimensional standards table that includes things like setbacks, and lot coverage, and that sort of thing. We are proposing a new setback requirement as part of the transition area between existing development outside of the concept plan boundary and new residential development within the concept plan boundary. And within that 40-foot area, there would be requirements for increased setbacks, larger lot sizes, and landscaping and screening requirements. So I'm going to go through that. This table, 1710-040, would be amended just to be more specific to show that there is a 40-foot minimum separation between existing dwelling units abutting the Park Place concept plan and a new dwelling unit within the Park Place concept plan.
So how does that look on a 5,000 square foot lot? I mean, are you pushing those housing units right up against the road then to account for that setback? Or are they smaller in footprint, or is there an allowance for a larger lot around the edge, or how?
That's a really good comment. I think probably we need to dial this in based on the potential for that type of situation and decide whether it's practicable for the R5 zone.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you. This is implementing the key concept of using green edges to define neighborhoods and buffer developments. This is just a clarification to add the word setback in this exception to setback section. Previously just referred to a required front yard, but did not say setback. So that's an addition.
Pete, can you go back one slide to the dimensional standards? I think part of the thinking in this is that the minimum rear yard is 20 feet. So that's making an assumption that the existing home was built with a 20-foot rear yard setback. So the idea would be that their required rear yards on each lot make up the 40 feet. That's the idea. Is it always going to be implementable is one of the things that we'll want to look at a little more closely, but just kind of on paper, mathematically, that's where that 40-foot came from.
So existing dwelling unit as in the footprint of the house?
Right.
Rather, okay, structure to structure. Does that include accessory structures or just the dwelling unit?
Just the dwelling unit.
Just the dwelling unit, okay.
And it's typically rear yards abutting rear yards. So
Right.
that's kind of where we came up with it. But we need to look at the R5 rear yard setback, make sure it's feasible.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I missed that definition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicola. And then within this table also, just adding some additional lines for clarification of existing setbacks, just to make it easier to read, and indenting some things as well. So for, if multifamily is a permitted use in the R3.5 zone, and areas within the concept plan were to be rezoned to that, we wanted to specify a minimum and maximum density for that area. Sorry. And what? So 21 to 22 units per acre is a typical density for multifamily. And that is what is specified for townhomes, roughly, which is a permitted middle housing type in all of these zones already. I'm not saying that townhomes and multifamily are the same thing. I'm just talking about the relative density. And that would address the key element 5, a mix of housing types and ranges of affordability, and allowing multifamily within the R35 zone through a clear and objective process. This section 1710.050 would be amended to include a reference to the density and how it's calculated. Currently, it reads that duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes count as a single dwelling unit for the purposes of calculating maximum net density. This is part of the middle housing amendments that were already made. And then total dwelling units within a development may count for the purposes of calculating minimum net density. And we're adding that a cross-reference to the new proposed standard, what I'm going to talk about for housing diversity. So they would count as multifamily units, sorry. We're going to cross-reference section 1721.105, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So the next piece we're going to talk about is that transition area between the concept plan development and the existing development, where we're expecting newer, more intense residential development within the concept plan area. We're adding an applicability section so that it applies to all development in the R5 district within the concept plan area, and that these standards would apply in addition to and supersede the standards of the R5 zone. And in the event of any conflict, these standards would control. This is implementing the need for a mix of housing types and ranges of affordability and the use of green edges to define neighborhoods and buffer developments. The perimeter of the concept plan boundary at the north end abuts several older low-density subdivisions. Those include Trailview, which is zoned R10, Wasco Acres, zoned R6, and Tracy Heights, which is zoned R6. So within that area that's shown with a dashed green line, it's an approximate area, it's not to scale. Larger setbacks, lot sizes, and screening is desired in this transition area to buffer that density and create that feathered edge. And this next piece is the minimum lot sizes for residential uses. So we're proposing 5,000 square foot minimum lot size for single-family detached dwellings, duplexes and triplexes, 1,500 square feet for townhouses, and 7,000 square feet for quadplexes and cottage clusters. And those are in line with the minimum lot sizes for zones elsewhere in the city. Within the 40-foot setback area that we've spoken about previously, there would be screening and vegetation requirement, which could be accomplished through 3 ways. One is to preserve existing trees on lots or in a tract in a subdivision based on our tree protection chapter 1741. The other way would be to preserve native vegetation within the natural resource overlay district, or through some combination of landscaping and screening. So planting trees within a certain area at a certain density of tree planting and through the use of fencing. Next, we get into chapter 1721, which you probably have more input on. This is the residential design standards chapter. The current chapter includes a lot of discretionary standards. It refers to architecture styles that are, and guidelines that are discretionary. So we're pulling out some of the existing sections and amending them. That includes roofs, massing, porches, pedestrian paths, architectural details, materials, windows, garages, accessory structures, and we did add a draft section for solar orientation, which I'll talk about. These are standards that are in addition to the existing residential design standards. If there is a conflict, the more restrictive or higher standard would prevail. And this would support architectural integrity and variety in residential neighborhoods and implement the key element for a mix of housing types and ranges of affordability. So the standards apply to single-family detached and duplex, townhomes, triplexes, quadplexes, and they do not apply to multifamily development, live, work, or mixed use.
I have a question.
Yes.
that states that, that chapter states that flat roofs and shed roofs are not permitted except on accessory structures and for carports.
I think you're a little ahead of me, but I'll get there.
1721.030.
Yeah, I have a separate slide on that.
Oh, you do? Okay,
Yeah.
because my statement is I would state that in the Park Place concept plan area, flat roofs should not be allowed, period.
Okay. Yeah, we can talk about that.
Because it goes against the spirit of the Park Place concept plan.
Okay, yep. So let's see, where are we? Currently, the code has the same modification sentence written in all the subsections in it. And to make it shorter and clearer, we're going to add a section on modifications that would better meet design standards for residential design. Most residential plans are going to be reviewed at the building permit stage, which is a type 1 over-the-counter review with a checklist and set of building plans. And that would be clear and objective, but those seeking an exemption or modification can request that through a type 2 land use process prior to building permit application. The criteria for the modification are what is in the current code for site plan and design review, that the modification would result in a development that better meets the applicable design standard or the housing diversity standard, and that the modification is consistent with the purpose and intent of the residential design chapter. And so we're going to have a clear and objective standard path, and this is a type 2 alternative. Thank you. Yeah. So, Bob, to your concern about roof design, we're saying that flat roofs and shed roofs would not be permitted except on accessory structures and for carports. Primary roofs would be pitched at a minimum ratio of 5/12, except for secondary roofs and masses, and we define what those are in our definitions section. Requiring a traditional roof and minimum roof pitch for principal dwellings promotes compatibility of new residential construction with existing architecture. This would also help implement the solar access draft code section I want to talk about in a little bit, potentially. Yeah, Bob, do you want to give us your comments on the roofs?
Commissioner LaSalle, can you check your mic?
Flat roofs just don't fit in with the Park Place concept plan. And if you have a carport, the roof would easily be able to be matched to the pitch of the home. And any accessory structures, the pitches would also be able to be matched with the home. I think that flat roofs just would look odd. I just don't agree with the concept there. That's my
opinion.
So the comment is whether we should prohibit flat roofs on carports and accessory structures the same way as we would on principals.
And are you suggesting to add a requirement that the pitches match that of the primary dwelling?
I think that would be best. Yes.
Okay. Any thoughts?
I think my only concern is that if someone wanted to attempt a mid-century style design, like a rummer or other type of, creative thing that's kind of trending now, you might limit yourself in your ability of having some diversified architecture there. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. There is a type 2 modification process that somebody could.
Okay, and then would that also, is Senate Bill 1573 the one that allows people to waive those requirements too, or?
Yeah, a lot of what I'm talking about is potentially subject to mandatory adjustment.
All right, fine. Never mind.
We can go through that specific list of design standards that are waivable under SB 1573, but the list is long.
No, that's okay.
And roofs are on it, so.
No,
All right, let's keep plowing in.
Well, I guess, but before we move forward, I guess I'm just curious if we should leave this in and you want to keep thinking about it. Is there any consensus to go with the code the way it's written, or do you want to change it? Or do you want to just, chew on it and we'll bring it back?
I'm just thinking if someone wanted to do a butterfly roof on their house, they should be able to. Looks kind of cool.
Seems like a bad choice in this
it could be.
part of the world, but whatever.
Yeah. There are a few that are going in places.
So it seems like we just discussed removing the solar access standard.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, I think, specific to the street orientation.
Oh,
And I
okay.
wanted to make sure that there was still that consensus for the buildings as well. And
Gotcha.
maybe I missed that direction.
In my mind, I lumped them together, but may not be the same as everyone else.
What we drafted kept the roof requirement, but not the street orientation part. So anyway, we can jump ahead to the solar piece because it ties in with this. The solar access proposal is requires that all residential structures would be designed with one roof surface that is oriented within 30 degrees of a true east-west direction. So that doesn't mean the entire roof has to be. 100 square feet of it does. And it has to have one, cannot slope to true north if you're going to put solar on it. But I would just add that a lot of the feasibility for solar is done by the solar companies that are out there doing it. But, so this may be an unnecessary code revision because the technology is constantly changing and people are going to want solar. So,
Yeah, my thought is that, in 2008, this was aspirational as an up-and-coming thing, and now we're in a different world, and I just don't think it needs to be in the code. That's my opinion. But
great.
I thought earlier in the meeting we had eliminated the solar requirement, so this particular section should not apply at all.
Great.
A question for Pete. 30 degrees from, so if your street is exactly at a 45-degree angle, would you have to turn your house 15 degrees?
only the roof.
Because neither pitch will work. You'd have to twist it 15 degrees.
Yeah.
It's dumb.
But doesn't the code require that it face the street perpendicular?
Yeah,
Yeah, so,
It's impossible.
Yeah.
You have to, no.
yeah, it's not workable.
No.
Yeah.
very difficult. Okay, the massing requirement, so we put a new definition in for massing. Massing is the three-dimensional architectural design of space. The way that this would be accomplished is it would apply first to only buildings with a footprint that is defined as the outline of the building on the ground, over 1,200 square feet, not including porches or decks, shall provide for secondary massing, such as cross gables, wings, sunrooms, or some sort of extension under a separate roof line. Each secondary mass shall not have a footprint larger than 600 square feet for proportionality. So the thresholds that are written there, 1,200 square feet and 600 square feet are pretty small for your typical residential design, unless you're doing cottage clusters or other things. I think it would be harder to meet this for certain residential types, for example, townhomes. So we'll have to look at how that applies in more detail.
What's the lot coverage, the maximum lot coverage for, is it 40% for R5?
40% for a single-family detached, and it goes up for the other types, but 45 for townhomes.
Gotcha, okay. Good.
Could, that states not including porch or deck areas, but could a porch or deck area be considered cross gabled to fit the requirement?
I think so, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So could we add that as you know, as the covered porch qualifies as that cross gabled portion?
I think we should probably tweak the language to make it clearer.
Okay.
And make it an or statement.
Okay.
Yeah. On this section, all we did was remove some discretionary language from the previous requirement. For porches and entries, we're requiring that each resident have a front porch, minimum of 24 inches above average grade, with skirting and at least 80 square feet, with no dimension less than 6 feet, with the widest dimension of the porch parallel to the street. Porch railings required, and the front porch shall be covered. All subdivisions shall have at least 75% of the housing utilize front porches. And then each residence would also have a separate delineated pedestrian connection from front door to the sidewalk, so it's not part of the driveway. You have the driveway as well, but you also have a separate path to the porch. Comments on that one?
The code sections that are in black are already existing, right? Like,
Right.
We're not proposing that. And then this is an example of how we removed an exemption and we're
Yes.
making that one modification section.
Right. This would just be, if someone wanted to exempt from this or modification, they would refer to that section,
Do the other
which
process.
is at the beginning of the chapter.
Pete, was there any discussion with staff on the minimum 24 inches above grade with skirting? That one stands out as.
There hasn't been a lot of discussion. I know from just doing residential review elsewhere in the city, there's an 18-inch as an option, depending on, we have like 22 different elements that you can choose, and typically a house has to meet 8 to 10 of those. So there's a list of 22 that you can pick.
Yeah, I don't take exception to the porch requirement. It's the raising above
The
grade,
raising,
right?
the
Like,
grade piece.
if you have a house at grade and they can provide the porch, does the 2 feet above provide any significance? And if so, you're driving the cost up.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically requiring the house to be 24 inches above front door grade, no matter what.
Is it too, do you feel it's too high
I think you could take out that altogether
altogether?
and let the context of where the site is drive that, right? Like if you have a porch, depending on how they grade it, and how they put the driveway in, it may need to be 24 inches or more, or it could be at grade, but I think you're driving it, you're forcing it up. It's kind of maybe a miss.
Yeah, and I think it will be a challenge, particularly in the slopey areas.
Yeah.
So my question is about the porch railings and how that interfaces with the actual building code, because the building code doesn't require railings until you're at 30 inches, and then the railings are required to have a certain height and certain width between the balusters and such. That's not addressed in here.
Right.
So so once you require the porch railings as part of the development code, then do the rest of the building code kicks in because of that railing, in terms of the railing height and the width between balusters, all that?
It's a good question, but I don't think it would overlap, because your building code would kick in your railing requirement at the 30-inch.
Right, but in this, I mean, if we're saying that you have a porch that's 12 inches off the ground, but we require the railings, then does the railing have to meet the building code as if it were above 30 inches?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But that would be one that your building official
Good
could maybe
question.
answer.
I'll check with the building official and see what that means.
That's a good question.
Do you want there to be a railing on a porch that's at grade?
I think that becomes a design question, right? Is that a feature of the caricature of the neighborhood? And that's where I feel like it's a safe requirement that doesn't infringe on building permit requirements.
In this context, it's merely aesthetics, and
At 24 inches?
yeah, that's the question. So does the commission want to keep it or strike it?
Commissioner LaSalle, you had mentioned character and the aesthetic and concern for that. What's your take with a railing? If it's not required for fall protection, is it required for the architectural caricature of the neighborhood?
Microphone.
I would tend toward a railing requirement. Only for a certain height porch. You know, if you had a porch at grade, the rail would only be appearances, wouldn't serve any safety purposes. So I would not require a railing at grade.
Yeah, I would prefer to let the building code speak to the requirement for a railing.
Yep, I think it's too confining if you have a railing
I think
requirement
that's a
for
lot
everything.
clearer. Yeah. Okay, thank you. This next section, we're just renumbering from letters to numbers. That's an easy one. And
I check those.
also with this section, the difference on siding, the one thing we did add is a requirement for a fairly narrow type of siding, 5-inch reveal, and it can be either smooth or textured.
Okay, but you're driving up the cost. It costs more to do a 4-inch reveal than it does to do a 6-inch reveal in labor.
I guess I'd be interested in the intent, right? Because
Well, I think this originally came out of the desire to make it look more historic and have narrower siding. When they were also making reference to Queen Anne and vernacular and bungalow and other things. But, so that was the intent of this.
I guess I was more my reaction was having more specific language. Like when you say narrow horizontal wood or composite siding, that could be a lot of things. But without really knowing and being a part of the discussion, I'm assuming you want some sort of lap siding, something traditional, residential. So
Right.
the reveal I don't think really gets you much. It's more defining what that material is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay.
Because like narrow horizontal, that could be slats, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be something that's someone would deem residential.
Yeah.
Kind of a weird thing because it says narrow horizontal wood or composite siding 5 inches wide or less. And so that is the presumed requirement, but then it says both smooth siding or textured siding is acceptable, but shall not be permitted together on the same building.
Right.
So it sounds like you can either do the lap siding or the smooth siding.
Yes, that's right, but not on the same building.
Okay.
Sorry, that's what I meant
But whether
to say.
you do the smooth or the textured, it has to be 5-inch reveal.
Okay.
Correct.
And so we're excluding vinyl. And we're excluding the ability to do like a composite shingle. I know that's kind of a popular thing on the gable end within the roof line these days
shingles?
to transition
No.
to a composite shingle, so that's not allowed.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point. I personally think that people should be able to have that option.
I agree. I think there should be more flexibility in this.
Yeah.
We're going to end up looking like there's just going to be like
Yeah.
a lot of similarity.
We're going to look like what the 5-inch reveal was designed to avoid.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is basically strike the narrow, strike 3. Or
Well, if we strike it, then it doesn't allow that as a siding option either. This is a list of things that are allowed, not a list of things that are excluded.
Exactly.
So
Is the compromise then to allow just wood or composite siding? And that it either needs to
or
be...
shingles.
Yeah, I think
Or
if you said
shingles.
horizontal wood or composite siding, that's providing flexibility, but also, you're limiting, you're not having the vinyl, you're not having metal, you're dictating that it's wood or a fiber cement product, which is going to get you the residential material. And then from there, then you can leave in, it's either all smooth texture or all wood texture.
well, I would add vertical shingle style. I think would.
Is
Some of my
vertical
concern-
shingle style clear and objective? What is that, how do you describe that in a quantified way?
We have to define it, I think. Work on a definition. I guess the question I have is if that's also permitted, as panel permitted, a full hardy panel.
I think when you say horizontal, that excludes panel, right?
Okay.
Because when you say horizontal, traditionally I'm thinking it's lap siding, it's shiplap or butt siding, tongue and groove siding. The panel, you would be very specific in saying composite panel.
Well, the panel would.
Or could you put narrow, horizontal, or vertical wood or composite siding? That would cover the shingles part.
One thing to think about is when we're talking about the affordable housing units, if we're really trying to get these costs down on some of these affordable housing, some of this, if we're expecting, obviously, some of this is really expensive of what we're requiring. So, it would be nice to get some of that cost down for the affordable housing units, especially if we're wanting to look outside eventually, something outside of the townhome.
So, Pete, I agree with you 100%. Maybe look at, I just pulled up online James Hardy, right? Hardy is a manufactured fiber cement panel. When you look at their product types, the way they identify it is plank siding, panel siding, and shingle or shake siding. The plank gives you the butt, the tongue and groove, the horizontal component you're looking for. The panel is board and batten style, which I think you're trying to avoid.
Well, the panel would be, you'd hang up the panels and you put the battens every 12 or 16 inches, which is allowed. I mean, that's how you get that functional look. And when you're building a building, you just tack on the battens.
I think you would have to dictate that though, because that's, again, driving up the cost, and most developers wouldn't build with that. Like, they would build traditional board and batten without the horizontal.
Yeah.
These material choices, where did they come from? Is this from the concept plan?
It came
Who picked
from
them?
the concept plan through a set of draft, it was in the appendix.
Because these options, they kind of limit advancements in siding.
Yeah.
So if somebody came up with something new, like maybe some really amazing looking metal, would there be a way to get a variance on that, or does specifically exclude any other possibilities forever?
Get a modification.
Yeah, you get the type 2 modification.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these are just the outright allowed. You can still ask for something else.
Yeah.
Okay. This is the non-discretionary route. You put these on, and they're not cheap. I think vinyl would be a good, affordable option. Obviously, it can be installed poorly and look bad, but so can hardy plank. So it doesn't solve everything. But okay, if there's a way around these being the only options, then I'm okay with it.
I mean, the alternative way to do this is draft a section for prohibited materials, and everything else is.
But again, there could be advancements that make a prohibited material look good.
I agree.
This is a difficult one. I'm struggling with it.
Yeah.
Before we move on, we're coming up on our 10 o'clock end. Is there interest in extending?
How many more slides do you have?
Well, I have 10 more.
Yep.
They should go
We'll
pretty
need
quick.
a motion and a vote.
The option besides continuing past 10 would be that we just continue this to the next meeting, so.
Yeah.
How's the next meeting look?
It's more Park Place.
But it's, I mean, in terms of time and,
So you're asking what does the agenda look
so
like?
if we put off 45 minutes tonight, are we kicking the ball down further where we already have 3 hours for next meeting?
We'll do some agenda management
Okay.
so that it's not 3 hours worth, but yeah.
I'm good with extending, but
I prefer that we call it a night.
Okay.
Move on. Yeah. I go with that.
Okay.
There's not much left to cover, but it can go quickly the next time.
Okay. You got 2 minutes if you want to.
Oh, I do?
I mean, yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure what time it is.
Talk
Okay.
fast.
If you think the next slide is, yeah.
Okay, so the next slide has to do with the windows. So currently, we require 15% windows on the first floor. This would require one window every 15 feet of linear elevation on each floor of each elevation. And if shutters are used, they shall be proportional and be half of the window opening so that the entire window is covered. That is a pretty high standard for 2 floors.
Okay.
Normally, we just apply it to the first floor.
I neglected to allow time for communications, so we'll probably, everyone keep their thoughts on this one to start the next meeting. And do we have any communications?
Let's see, communications. If you can stay just 1 or 2 minutes extra, I'd love to get a group shot, and that is for our volunteer appreciation event happening in July. And then, oh, it's a tropical theme. This is the volunteer awards recognition. It's Tuesday, July 30th at 6:30, Pioneer Community Center. Oh, okay. And please RSVP and then nominate someone for volunteer. Do they have these? Okay, all right, so you have these. And then, so our next meeting, June 24th, what we had scheduled is a presentation from John Lewis, who's going to talk about infrastructure and how growth is programmed into that. That was part of our work plan. And then the rest of the time, it's kind of be like tonight, the rest of the time would be set aside for more Park Place Code discussions, so.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other communications? All right, we're adjourned. 10 o'clock on the dot.